Hello everyone and welcome to my YouTube channel YNR Daily Spoiler. DNA Disaster. Clary confesses the truth about her baby.
No, it's Holden. You betrayed me again. Claire's baby secret destroys Kyle on YNR. Kyle pulled the kitchen door open with the demeanor of a man who had spent the night trying to sleep, but instead ran through situations that ended horribly. He had attempted to remain composed. He'd tried all morning. All rehearsals came to a halt as soon as Claire noticed him. He appeared tired in a way that made age look cruel. There was grief in the set of his jaw, and something angrier behind it. "We need to talk," he remarked, because some nights, the economy of English was all they had. Claire gulped. "We do." The words was a valley, simple yet terrible. They sat, the house filled with minor domestic noises that are usually soothing. The furnace ticking and the refrigerator's gentle hum. In the silence, she heard another sound, a distant staccato of concern, like rain on a window. This was the sound of everything about to change. "I'm going to tell you," Claire began, "because telling the truth is an unpleasant activity that must be completed as if it were work. I can't keep evading it. You deserve to be honest. Call it out what may have been a joke or a plea. I deserve honesty. I've been asking for that for years," he explained. "You know that." Claire caught his gaze. There was a moment when she carried his appearance like a medal. Now his gaze tested her in the same way that a jeweler would a stone. "Before I say it," she began, "I want you to know I never intended to hurt you. I attempted to protect us in the only way I believed possible." Kyle wrapped his fingers around his coffee cup like a lifeline. "Protect us," he repeated with a quiet voice. "By keeping aspects of your life private? What exactly are we constructing our lives on?" She closed her eyes. "I was scared," she admitted. "I'm frightened of losing you and everything we've built. I made a decision when I was weaker than I am today. I figured I could fix it." "What has to be fixed?" Kyle inquired. He didn't sound hopeful. He sounded fatigued in a way that made Claire's heart race. She had already told Tracy and a few others the most basic version. She had sought advice and been welcomed with either compassion or a practical steadying that felt like a bandage. But the reality was bigger than bandages. "Connor's paternity," she explained. The name landed in the room like a coin clanging on tile. Kyle's face went from wary to confused in an instant. He barked a harsh laugh. "You're not serious." Claire squeezed the following words out as if they were medicine. "Connor isn't Adams. She paused, since 5 years of silence weighs more heavily on the tongue than any stone. Kyle blinked. "Not Adams." It was as if the room had been repainted while they were talking. "Claire, what? Do you mean there was a mistake in the records? A laboratory mix-up? Is there anyone else?" "Who is?" She could have left the world figure out the rest. However, the most terrible reality is frequently one that you can only tell yourself. She inhaled quickly and delivered it like a little frigid thing. "It's Holden," she explained. For a brief moment, the word refused to expand beyond a single syllable. Kyle's features distorted into something that left little room for nuance. "Holden." His voice sounded like an alarm. The cup clattered on the countertop. No. Claire had anticipated rage. She had not anticipated the exact expression that passed over him. The sight of recognition, remembrance, and 1,000 minor betrayals that clicked into place. "You betrayed me again," he muttered, his accusation low and bitter. "After everything we survived, after everything you promised, you did this again." Claire flinched, as if punched. The again came with a history, a former fault she'd never quite rectified, an earlier adultery forgiven but never truly erased in their private ledger. She'd assumed she'd made amends and become a better lady as a result. But memory gnaws, and forgiveness can coexist with a recurring ache. "It wasn't like that," she explained, her words stumbling. "It wasn't planned. I didn't mean to." Kyle snapped. "Not like that. Claire, you slept with Holden." The words were delivered with precision. "You slept with him and then chose to raise Connor as if he were someone else's son. You made him believe he belonged to a man who cherished him as his own. You lied." The room appeared to tilt. Claire's eyes widened. "I never told you because I believed it would destroy everything. I believed that if the child had stability and a home, we would be able to love each other despite the facts. I decided to protect the child. You protected him by lying, Kyle clarified. You defended yourself. You chose comfort over honesty. Claire's throat clenched. It's not that simple. It is simple, Kyle stated plainly. A youngster deserves the truth. Our son deserves the truth. You deprived him of that agency. You deprived me of the opportunity to be his father. He stood up, pacing, a man who required motion to think. How long? He demanded. When did this occur? Claire closed her eyes and allowed the memory to emerge, like a photograph slipping out in the darkness. It was during the rough period, she explained. We were parted. Holden and I felt adrift that night. I made an error. I told no one. Months later, I discovered I was pregnant. I felt afraid. I returned to you because you were the secure shore I wanted to drown on. I never intended for any of this to explode like this. Kyle paused, like a man compelled to listen to his own past. So you opted to continue on someone else's life under my identity. You entrusted our marriage to a lie. I thought I could atone, she murmured. I thought love could be enough. You thought. Kyle's laughter was empty. That one word has ruined us before. The recollection of an old betrayal, Claire's affair years ago, swelled out like an old scar under stress. He had forgiven her back then because he was a man who desired a family, and because love was a contract that could be repaired. However, restoration came at a cost, and secrets continued to accrue like unpaid taxes. Did Holden know? Kyle's voice was chilly and clinical as he searched for the network of deception. She didn't. He didn't know the child was his until now, Claire informed me. Not until the final month. I'd never told him. He felt Connor was Adam's, as did everyone else. Neither of us knew. I requested a test because something complicated occurred at the clinic, and I needed certainty. Then the findings came back, and she paused because the rest of it was still painful to utter. Kyle's eyes flared. You did a test run without telling me. You had blood drawn and concealed it. Claire struggled to articulate her thoughts. I figured I could handle it quietly. I thought I could talk to Holden and solve things before you had to know. You thought, Kyle said with the same angry tone. You thought again. The house now felt like it was haunted by small, intimate spirits. The youngster upstairs, the tiny boy whose grin had previously patched them back together, was sleeping in the chamber that housed the scaffolding of his young life. The realization that he was in the middle of a lie slammed something cold and mechanical into Kyle's chest. Have you told anybody? He asked. What about your parents? Jack, Devin. No, Claire replied. I told no one. I wanted to find a method to inform you without destroying you. I failed. Kyle's face hardened. You've failed for years, Claire. This is not just a slip. It is a pattern. You hide, you decide, and then you want us to deal with the consequences because you believe you know better. He has the rawness of a man betrayed. She had the rawness of someone who has just realized the cost of her security. You betrayed me, Kyle eventually murmured, as if pieces of his existence were being torn away from him. Again, Claire's knees threatened to crumble. She reached for him, the guy who had altered her life, but he backed away. The movement was tiny, but it represented conflict. Where is Holden now? Kyle inquired. Does he know? Is he? He doesn't know, Claire explained. He has no idea that it's his child. Not until yesterday did I tell him. I had to tell him before you heard it from someone else. Kyle's mouth constricted. You told him? Yes. There was a beat and a fracture in the air. Kyle's hand reached his mouth, his fingers pressed like a dam. Why him? He inquired, as if asking why could defuse the bone of the thing. Because Claire searched for a more stable anchor. Because he would be Connor's father in ways I could not have expected from Adam. Because he would understand what it meant to stand silently, supply, and be consistent in a way that I had been too afraid to expect of you. I assumed he would react, and we could find out how to tell you. I thought. You thought, Kyle snapped. You considered again. Do you know what this looks like? It appears you attempted to create a family without me. She could have shown him the transcripts of her fear, the nights she'd spent awake, terrified of losing everything. She could have begged and explained, but explanations felt like theater curtains now, dramatic and insufficient. You made a choice, Kyle remarked. And you made it selfishly. What about marriage? Claire inquired. Because when the ceiling collapses, you measure the beams. How about the promises we made? You knew I wasn't flawless. You loved me for all of myself. Now you're going to let one single event erase years. Kyle's countenance softened, not into pity, but into the agony of a man who had loved with sensitive tenacity and now had to understand that love alone could not hide what had been concealed. Maybe I can't, he replied. Perhaps I cannot undo the treachery. Perhaps I don't want to. The phrase struck like frost. Claire knew there would be consequences. She had not anticipated the speed with which they would arrive. He's our son, she added, her voice soft. We gave him life, not DNA. Regardless of everything else, that is correct. Kyle stood at the window, silhouetted against the gray morning. Tears that he hadn't allowed himself to shed stung the corners of his eyes. A weight in his chest caused him to breathe shallowly. He remembered Connor's face and how the boy's smile had once provided solace in difficult times. He thought of Holden, the man who had been a consistent presence, quietly caring and steadfast in ways that promised to be tender rather than threat. Is there anything you can say right now to make a difference? He asked, not looking at her. Claire rose and traversed the tiny space between them. She took his hands, which were frigid. I am sorry, she said. I understand that it does not solve the problem. I love you. I always have. This was not about preferring someone else over you. It was about terror. I thought I could restore what I'd shattered without tearing you apart. You took me apart anyway, Kyle replied. A stillness developed between them, the kind of pressure that changed furniture and plans. For a brief while, the future appeared to be blank. They didn't have to wait long for the aftermath. In Genoa City, quiet invites rumors. Rumors start when a secret leaks. Devon, the most dependable type of lawyer, contacted within an hour since in their world. Legal counsel rarely slept. He spoke in a serious tone, as if he had experienced numerous implosions. Kyle, I need to advise you for custody, for paternity filings. Devon went on, we should get tested. If you believe you are being tricked, you should seek legal protection. I'll help. Kyle felt the urgency like a hand on his back. Do it, he instructed. Start it. Now. Devon's voice took him through the processes with the efficiency of an engineer. Call the lab, ensure the chain of custody, preserve the child's privacy, and file an injunction as needed. The practical became immediate, while the moral remained fresh. Word spreads quickly, faster even in Claire's shame. The rumor spread, followed by confirmation and a demand for information that was louder than they planned. Adam was upset at being mistaken for the father of a child he adored and reared. He also felt deceived, but in a different way. When Claire eventually confronted him and acknowledged the truth, Holden was stunned into private misery. Did you keep this from me? Holden said, as if he had been misled into a new language. You have kept it from me for years. I wanted to tell you sooner, Claire explained. I wanted to. I waited because I was frightened of your reaction, losing what we had, and hurting Kyle. Holden's gaze traveled from her to the floor, then back again. The man's rage had always been soft, not explosive, but long-lasting. You didn't tell me because telling me would have required the next step, he was saying softly. You sought the protection of a lie. That's no little matter, Claire. No, she replied. It wasn't. Holden's expression was unaffected by indulgence, as he regarded the child who had roots in him, whether he welcomed it or feared it. We have to do the right thing, he stated plainly. For the boy. And there, briefly, the two of them stood with the narrowest of common goals. However, Genoa City's equipment cannot be shut off. Cameras were set up on the driveway, and the calls increased. Kyle's actions at the Abbott home left a mark on the family. He filed for emergency paternity confirmation in court and began discussions about custody protection. He rushed swiftly not to fight, but because he believed that in a society where secrets cost so much, the only currency left was truth. And the truth at the moment was a nasty, essential ledger. That evening, a custody hearing was arranged, with the judge as a meticulous figure who spoke in terms of care and legality. The courtroom smelt like paper, coffee, and ancient plays. Claire sat in the gallery and saw Kyle from a distance, his profile exposed beneath the harsh courtroom lights. The truth of her actions unfolded not as a philosophical argument, but as little procedural cruelty. Petitions were filed, counsel spoke legalese, and the judge asked probing questions about purpose and intent. "You withheld something material from your spouse," the judge observed at one point, addressing the inquiry to Claire. "Why?" Claire felt her world narrow to the sound of her own breathing. She presented the narrative as best she could, including the anxiety, solitude, moment of weakness, and efforts she had taken to improve. She didn't lie. She didn't embellish. The courtroom dealt with this in the most formal manner possible, as the law was more concerned with documents than broken hearts. Kyle's attorney talked with the same harsh clarity that the law provides. "This is not about romance," he explained. "This is about a pattern of deception involving a child. We request supervised visits until paternity is legally recognized or not, as well as a full examination of the custodial setting." Claire could have fallen through the floor. She calmed herself down by reminding herself of one simple truth. The boy deserved the best they could give him, even if it had been momentarily lost. Outside the courthouse, the reporters attempted to dramatize every breath. Behind the screams, a minor miracle occurred. The child, Connor, worked in a different gravity. He was still too young to understand the news. He fell asleep in a phase known as the before, unconscious of the legal phrase used in his identity. Weeks would pass in what seemed like years. The DNA would confirm what Claire already knew, and Holden would offer to be a part of the boy's life in a way that prioritized the child's well-being. Kyle would move from rage to a quieter, more complicated landscape, where choices are made based on what children need rather than the heat of betrayal. There would be attorneys and counseling, custody agreements, and carefully mediated introductions. Kyle would spend nights alone at the foot of his son's bed, contemplating how to be both angry and generous. Claire would undertake the difficult trek through treatment, public repentance, and private restoration, attempting to reconstruct what had been destroyed. In the months that followed the scandal's trench, something strange happened, damaged and transformed. The family did what families do in soap operas and in real life. They created a new map. They realized that biology and parenting are not necessarily synonymous. They discovered that while betrayal destroys trust, it does not necessarily exclude the chance of reattachment. They discovered that children can be robust in ways that the heart cannot always be. Kyle, slowly and deliberately, began to realize that the child he loved had not been stolen. Rather, the child had been saddled with secrecy by a terrified parent. He did not forgive immediately. Forgiveness for that bruise takes years. But he also held the boy, sometimes silently, sometimes crying. It did not make the betrayal disappear. It simply became a thread that they needed to learn to knit around. Claire's confession had been a cataclysm. And one of the cruel ironies of Genoa City is that it frequently produces second acts. The second act was untidy. It wasn't theatrical. It included minor details like parenting classes, family therapy, auditors and lawyers, the removal of voices, and the addition of adults. Holden stepped up as a steady version of fatherhood, while Kyle returned to a role that needed to be redefined. Claire would not be absolved once the dust had settled enough to recognize shape. She'd have to live with the stigma of having betrayed the man she loved more than anything. But the story also contained a stubborn, inconvenient truth. People, even those who have made monstrous mistakes, occasionally choose to do the hard, slow work that allows for reparation. Kyle walked into Connor's room one morning, months after the revelation had torn the family apart. He recalled the night of the confession, the sound of the word Holden like a blow. He remembered how the world seemed to tilt before rearranging itself. He sat on the bed and quietly took Connor's small hand in his own. Claire watched from the doorway, maintaining a distance dictated by policy and apology. She had been the architect of this ruin, and she knew that some ruins could only be rebuilt stone by stone. Kyle looked up and for the first time in a long time met her gaze with something other than rage. I don't know if I can ever trust you the way I did, he said, firm but not soft. But I know one thing. He's our child, because of the life we gave him. We will protect him. We'll do better. Claire allowed the sob to rise and overtake her like a passing flood. It would not make things better. But for one small, fragile heartbeat, it was all she had. The sound of grief, the willingness to confront it, and the slow, painful journey towards something that might one day be called forgiveness.